The entire auditorium buzzed with laughter. Principal Mr. Caldwell smirked as he handed the violin to Sadie Walker, the quiet daughter of the school's janitor. "Go on," he said, barely hiding his amusement. "Show us what you've got." The students whispered, some chuckling. Sadie's fingers trembled as she held the violin. No one had ever given her a chance, until now. She took a deep breath, placed the bow on the strings, and played the first note. Within seconds, the laughter vanished. Gasps echoed across the room. The principal's jaw dropped. No one was ready for what happened next. Before we start, like this video and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories. Now let's begin. The room had never been this loud. Students whispered, some openly laughed, and even a few teachers exchanged amused glances. Sadie Walker stood frozen on the stage, gripping the violin tighter. She could feel the heat of their stares, the judgment, the disbelief. She had spent years cleaning these very floors alongside her father, watching from the shadows as the other kids thrived in their world of privilege. Now they were all watching her for a different reason, waiting for her to fail. Mr. Caldwell, the school principal, leaned against the podium with a smirk. "Go on, Miss Walker," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Let's hear what you've got." The weight of the violin in her hands felt heavier than ever. Sadie had dreamed of this moment. Not like this, not as a joke, but as a real chance to prove herself. Her father had always told her that talent could break barriers, that music had the power to change people's hearts. But standing here, facing a sea of mocking faces, she wasn't sure if he had been right. Taking a deep breath, she lifted the bow and placed it on the strings. Her fingers trembled slightly as she positioned them. She had never played for an audience before, never performed in front of people who weren't her father or the old woman in apartment 3B who loved to listen through the thin walls. The first note rang out. The laughter stopped. Something about the sound seemed to shift the very air in the room. Sadie's nerves melted away as muscle memory took over. Her fingers moved flawlessly, dancing over the strings, the bow gliding effortlessly. The music poured out of her, raw, unfiltered, filled with something none of them had expected. Emotion. The principal's smirk vanished. A hush fell over the auditorium. Sadie didn't just play, she commanded the instrument, weaving notes together with precision and passion. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a mixture of sorrow and defiance. It wasn't just music, it was a story, a message, a declaration. One by one, the students who had been whispering fell silent. Their expressions shifted from amusement to shock, then something else, something Sadie had never seen before. Admiration. Mr. Caldwell straightened, arms crossing over his chest. His eyes narrowed as if trying to understand how this girl, this janitor's daughter, was capable of such brilliance. The teachers exchanged stunned glances. Some of the students looked downright uncomfortable, as if realizing for the first time that they had underestimated her. Sadie kept playing. She wasn't just proving them wrong, she was taking control of the very stage they had put her on as a joke. The notes swelled, filling every inch of the auditorium. It was impossible to ignore her now. When the final note faded, the silence was deafening. No one moved, no one spoke. Then a single clap echoed from the back of the room. It was hesitant at first, then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. Some stood, some cheered, others just sat there stunned. Mr. Caldwell's face was unreadable, but there was something new in his eyes. Regret. Sadie lowered the violin slowly. She had come here expecting humiliation. Instead, she had left them speechless. And this was only the beginning. Sadie's heart pounded as she lowered the violin. The thunderous applause echoed through the auditorium, but she remained still, unsure how to react. Moments ago, they had been laughing at her, waiting for her to embarrass herself. Now their faces told a different story. Shock, awe, even a hint of guilt. She scanned the room, catching glimpses of students who had never once acknowledged her existence now looking at her as if seeing her for the first time. In the front row, a girl named Lauren, one of the most popular students in school, sat frozen, her mouth slightly open. She had been the first to laugh when Mr. Caldwell had handed Sadie the violin, but now she just stared, her fingers gripping the armrests of her seat. Next to her, her best friend Heather whispered something under her breath, her expression unreadable. Sadie's eyes drifted toward the teachers. Some looked stunned, others uncomfortable. Mr. Caldwell remained by the podium, his usual confident stance gone. His fingers tapped against his crossed arms, a slight crease forming between his brows. It was as if he was struggling to process what had just happened. "Sadie Walker," he finally said, his voice quieter than before. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Sadie hesitated. She could feel every eye in the room on her, waiting. The same people who had mocked her seconds ago now wanted answers. "My father," she said simply. A murmur spread through the audience. Of course, her father, the school's janitor, the same man who had mopped these very floors, who had been invisible to them. They had never thought twice about him, never imagined he had anything to offer beyond cleaning their messes. And yet, through him, Sadie had learned something none of them could ignore. Mr. Caldwell's lips pressed into a thin line. He had humiliated her in front of the entire school, expecting failure. Instead, she had left him scrambling for words. Before he could say anything else, a voice called out from the crowd. "Sadie, can you play another one?" She turned toward the back of the room. A boy named Ryan stood there, his expression earnest. He wasn't one of the kids who usually teased her. If anything, he had always been polite, but he had never gone out of his way to talk to her either. A few others murmured in agreement. The energy in the room shifted. What had started as a cruel joke was now something else entirely. Sadie hesitated. Playing had been easy when she had something to prove, but now they were asking because they genuinely wanted to hear her. That was different. She lifted the violin again, this time with less fear. She drew in a breath, let the weight of the moment settle, and then played. This time, she didn't hold back. The melody flowed effortlessly, each note weaving into the next like poetry. The sound was powerful yet delicate, as if telling a story only she could tell. She didn't need words to explain herself. The music did it for her. The students leaned in, captivated. Some had their eyes closed, lost in the sound. Even Mr. Caldwell, who had been stiff and guarded moments ago, seemed to relax, his arms unfolding. As the final note faded, silence fell once more. But this time, there was no hesitation. The applause erupted instantly, even louder than before. Some students were on their feet, others whispering to one another, shaking their heads in disbelief. Sadie exhaled slowly. For years she had accepted being invisible, but now they saw her. They heard her, and she wasn't going to disappear again. As the applause filled the auditorium, Sadie's chest rose and fell with deep breaths. She had never expected this. The same students who had ignored her for years, who had whispered about her father's job, were now clapping, standing, even cheering. The sound was overwhelming, almost surreal. Mr. Caldwell still stood near the podium, his face unreadable. His eyes darted across the audience, as if trying to regain control of the situation. This assembly had been his idea, meant to be a moment of humiliation for her, a lesson to put her in her place. Instead, she had turned it into something else entirely. He stepped forward, clearing his throat. "That was unexpected," he said, his voice measured. "Sadie, I had no idea you had such talent." Sadie met his gaze, searching for any sincerity in his words. He wasn't used to being wrong, and she could tell he didn't like it. A hand shot up in the audience. It was Ryan, the boy who had asked her to play another song. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked, loud enough for everyone to hear. Sadie hesitated. She had spent her whole life keeping to herself, avoiding attention, but now she was at the center of it. She glanced at the violin in her hands before speaking. "My dad taught me," she said simply. Whispers rippled through the crowd. The janitor, the man they barely noticed, the man who swept the halls while they walked past without a second glance. Another voice called out, this time from one of the teachers. "Sadie, how long have you been playing?" She swallowed, gripping the neck of the violin tighter. "Since I was 5, she admitted. "My dad used to play before he had to stop." The murmurs grew louder. Mr. Caldwell straightened, clasping his hands in front of him. "Sadie," he said, his voice careful now, "why have we never heard you play before?" Sadie's fingers tightened on the bow. No one ever asked, she said, the words sharper than she intended. A few students looked down, uncomfortable. Lauren, the girl who had laughed the loudest before, suddenly stood. She started, then hesitated. For the first time, she seemed at a loss for words. The silence stretched until another teacher spoke. Sadie, have you ever had formal lessons? Sadie shook her head. Just my dad. More whispers. Mr. Caldwell exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He turned to the other teachers, exchanging looks, then faced the audience. Sadie, would you consider representing our school in the upcoming statewide music competition? Gasps echoed through the room. Sadie's heart nearly stopped. Lauren's head whipped around to stare at Mr. Caldwell. Wait, what? She blurted. That competition is for… She cut herself off, but everyone knew what she was about to say. It was for students who had been trained professionally, students with tutors and years of experience in front of audiences, students like her, not someone like Sadie. Sadie's mind raced. Was this another joke? Another setup? She met Mr. Caldwell's gaze, trying to read him, but this time she saw something different. He wasn't mocking her anymore. He wasn't sure what to do with her talent, but he knew one thing. He couldn't ignore it. Sadie glanced at the violin in her hands. She had played for herself her whole life, hidden in the shadows. Now the spotlight was on her. This was her chance. She took a deep breath. I'll do it, she said. Sadie's heart pounded as she stepped off the stage, gripping her violin case tightly. The weight of what she had just agreed to settled in her chest. The statewide music competition. She had never played outside of her small world, never stood in front of real judges, never had to prove herself beyond the walls of her home, and now she was about to compete against students who had trained their entire lives with the best teachers money could buy. As the students spilled out of the auditorium, some still murmuring about what had just happened, Sadie felt a presence beside her. She turned to see Ryan walking next to her, his hands shoved in his pockets. That was insane, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. You played like, I don't even know, like something out of a movie. Sadie smiled slightly, but she could still feel the weight of all the eyes on her. It felt different now. Before, they had only looked at her to judge, to mock. Now they looked at her with curiosity, with something close to admiration. But she knew admiration could quickly turn to resentment. Lauren brushed past them, her expression tight. She didn't say anything, but the way her shoulders stiffened told Sadie everything. This wasn't over. By the time she made it to the back hall where her father usually worked, she felt like she could finally breathe. The familiar scent of cleaning supplies and old wood filled her lungs, grounding her. She found him in the supply closet, sorting through bottles of disinfectant. He looked up as she stepped inside. You okay, kiddo? Sadie hesitated. She had spent so much of her life shielding him from the things that hurt her, pretending like the whispers and the stares didn't matter. But now everything was different. I played, she said softly. Her father stilled. Played? She nodded. In front of the whole school. They dared me to. Thought it would be funny. But then I played, and… She swallowed. And they want me to compete. Her father set the bottle down slowly. His hands, rough from years of work, twitched slightly before he reached for her shoulder. Sadie, he murmured, his voice thick with something unspoken. She bit her lip. I said yes. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he exhaled a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, full of disbelief in something else. Pride. Of course you did. Her chest tightened. But Dad, I don't know if I can do this. I've never had a teacher. I don't even know if I'm playing the right way. His eyes softened. You don't need a teacher to tell you what you already know. You play from here. He tapped his chest. That's something no lesson can teach. Sadie wanted to believe him, but as the reality of what she had signed up for sank in, doubt crept in as well. She glanced at the violin case in her hands. She had spent her whole life playing for herself, for her father. Could she really stand on a stage and prove she belonged among the best? She wasn't sure, but there was only one way to find out. Sadie sat on the edge of her bed, the violin resting in her lap. The competition was only weeks away, and the weight of it pressed down on her shoulders. She had never practiced for something like this before. She had always played in quiet moments, for herself, for her father. Now every note felt like it carried the expectations of an entire school, the disbelief of students who once saw her as invisible, and the silent hope in her father's eyes. She lifted the violin, placing it beneath her chin. Her fingers moved over the strings as she drew the bow across them. The familiar melody filled the small room, but something felt different. It was not the same carefree sound she was used to. There was tension, hesitation. A knock at the door startled her. She quickly lowered the violin as her father stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. He studied her face for a moment, then glanced at the violin. "It sounds different," he said gently. Sadie sighed. "I feel different." He nodded, stepping inside and sitting across from her. "It's not about the competition, is it?" She swallowed. "What if I go out there and they laugh? What if they say I don't belong?" Her father leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Sadie, do you remember the first time you picked up that violin?" She nodded. "I was 5. "And do you remember what you said?" A small smile ghosted across her lips. "I said I wanted to play like the wind, free and strong." Her father's eyes shone. "Then why are you playing like you're trapped?" The words settled deep in her chest. She looked at the violin again, running her fingers along the strings. "Close your eyes," he said. "Forget about the competition. Forget about the school, the principal, the students. Just play." Sadie hesitated, then did as he said. She let out a breath, lifted her bow, and played. The notes spilled out, raw and real. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. And for the first time in days, she felt free again. When she opened her eyes, her father was smiling. "That's the sound of someone who's ready." Sadie wasn't sure if she believed him yet, but as she held the violin close, she knew one thing. She was not backing down. The day of the competition arrived faster than Sadie had expected. The auditorium was grand, filled with students, parents, and judges who had been in the music world for years. The air buzzed with whispers, some curious, some doubtful. Sadie could feel their eyes on her, the same way they had watched her in the school auditorium. Only now the stakes were higher. She sat backstage, her fingers wrapped tightly around her violin. Around her, other contestants tuned their instruments, exchanged nervous glances, and adjusted their sheet music. She had none of that. No instructor, no written notes to follow, just the sound that had lived inside her for as long as she could remember. A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. "Nervous?" Sadie looked up to see Ryan standing beside her. He had his own violin in hand, dressed sharply in a suit that made him look every bit the part of a seasoned performer. He wasn't competing, but he had come anyway. "A little," she admitted. He smirked. "Good. That means it matters." Before she could respond, the announcer called her name. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was it. She walked onto the stage, the bright lights nearly blinding her. The audience was silent, waiting. In the front row, she spotted her father. He wasn't dressed like the other parents. His uniform from the school was clean, but still marked him as different. Yet he sat there, head high, pride clear in his eyes. Sadie took a deep breath and lifted her violin. The bow hovered over the strings. Then she played. The first note rang out, clear and strong. She closed her eyes, letting go of everything. The doubts, the whispers, the expectations. She played the way she always had, like the wind, free and powerful. The music poured from her, filling the vast space, making it impossible for anyone to ignore her. When the final note faded, there was silence. A breathless, stunned silence. Then the room erupted. Applause thundered through the auditorium. Some people stood, others looked at her in complete disbelief. The judges exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Sadie turned, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She had done it, not for them, but for herself. As she stepped off the stage, she saw the principal in the crowd. His expression was tight, his usual arrogance replaced with something else, regret. He had underestimated her. They all had. Sadie smiled. She did not need their approval. She had already won.